Emma was an ordinary 17-year-old, with one not-so-ordinary obsession. While her peers lost themselves in social media and gossip, Emma found solace in the fictional world of Guardian of the Lost, a TV show about a boy named Galvin. He was a fragile, sensitive soul trapped in a dangerous, unforgiving world, constantly pursued by villains who sought to exploit his unique powers. Emma wasn't just a fan, she was infatuated. Galvin's gentle voice, his big, expressive eyes, and the way he persevered despite his fears made her want to protect him. She would daydream about stepping into his world, wrapping her arms around him, and shielding him from harm. Over time, her admiration turned into love, a quiet yearning she kept to herself. One chilly Friday evening, Emma curled up in her room with a blanket, the glow of the TV flickering in the dark. It was her favorite episode, where Galvin was fleeing through a shadowy forest, his breaths ragged as he glanced over his shoulder. Emma watched, mouthing the lines she had memorized, feeling that familiar ache in her chest as Galvin's terror radiated from the screen. But then, something happened that made her freeze. Galvin stopped running. He turned and looked directly at the camera, his chest heaving. His piercing gray-blue eyes seemed to pierce through the screen, not as an actor breaking the fourth wall, but as if he were really seeing her. "Emma," he whispered, his voice trembling, "I need your help." Emma blinked in shock. Her heart raced, and her palms grew clammy. Surely, she was imagining this. But Galvin didn't waver. His eyes held hers, his expression desperate. "Please. They're coming for me. You're the only one who can help." Before Emma could utter a word, Galvin lunged toward the screen. The glass shimmered like water as his body passed through it, spilling onto her bedroom floor. He landed with a soft thud, his slender frame trembling as he scrambled to his feet. Emma stared, mouth agape, at the boy who had just stepped into her world. Galvin looked exactly as he did on the show, but more real. His dark, tousled hair fell messily over his forehead, and his pale, freckled skin glistened with sweat. His eyes were wide and full of fear as he scanned the room. "I don't have much time," he said, turning to Emma. "You have to help me hide. They'll be here any second." Emma's voice finally found her. "Hide you? How?" Galvin stepped closer, his tone urgent. "There's only one way. You have to swallow me." Her jaw dropped. "Swallow you? What are you talking about?" "There's no time to explain," he said, grabbing her hands. His touch sent a shock through her, like a dream she never wanted to wake from. "Please, Emma. Open your mouth and trust me. It's the only way they won't find me." Emma's mind raced, a whirlwind of disbelief, infatuation, and shock. Galvin, the boy she had spent years watching, dreaming about, and falling in love with, was not only real but standing in her room, asking her to do the unimaginable. She stared at him, her heart pounding so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. He looked at her with those gentle, pleading gray-blue eyes, his dark hair falling messily over his forehead. There was a raw vulnerability in his expression, a deep trust that made her feel both empowered and terrified. The way he said her name, soft and trembling, ignited something in her chest, a mix of exhilaration and fear. "I don't know if I can do this," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "You can," Galvin said, his voice soothing yet firm. "I believe in you, Emma. I need you." Her breath hitched. To hear him say her name like that, like she was the only person in the world who could save him, sent warmth rushing through her body. She nodded, her lips parting as she steeled herself for what was about to happen. "Thank you," Galvin whispered. "You're my only hope." Emma trembled as she opened her mouth wide, her cheeks burning with a mixture of embarrassment and awe. Her lips stretched as far as they could, and she felt the cool air brushing the dampness of her tongue. Galvin stepped closer, his movements careful and deliberate. The room was eerily quiet, the only sounds her shallow breaths and the faint rustling of his clothing. "I'll go slow," Galvin said softly. "Just relax." He reached out, his hand brushing her cheek as if to reassure her. The touch sent a shiver down her spine. Then carefully, he lifted one foot and placed it on her tongue. The sensation was surreal, light, warm, and slightly rough from the worn sole of his shoe. Emma's eyes widened as she felt his weight shift onto her, the reality of the moment sinking in. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. She nodded faintly, unable to speak, her mouth still wide open. He smiled, a small, grateful smile that made her heart flutter. Then he lifted his other foot, crouching slightly as he stepped fully onto her tongue. His weight pressed down, but it wasn't unpleasant. Emma could feel the slight tremble in his legs, the tension in his body as he balanced himself. The taste of him was faintly salty, mingled with the earthy scent of the forest he'd been running through moments earlier. She could even detect the metallic tang of adrenaline clinging to his skin. It was all so vivid, so real. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on breathing evenly as he continued to move. "I'm going to lie down now," Galvin said softly. "Tilt your head back a little." Emma obeyed, tilting her head upward as he shifted his weight. Slowly, he eased himself onto his stomach, his chest pressing against her tongue. She could feel the fabric of his shirt, damp with sweat, and the warmth of his body radiating through it. His hands reached forward, gripping the edge of her teeth for support as he began to slide further in. "You're doing amazing," he murmured, his voice low and soothing. "Just keep breathing." Her heart swelled at his words, a mix of pride and disbelief surging through her. Galvin, the boy she had admired for so long, trusted her completely. The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming, but she couldn't deny the strange thrill coursing through her veins. As his torso disappeared into her mouth, she felt the slight scrape of his belt against her teeth, the buckle cold and smooth. His legs dangled outside, his toes brushing against her lips. He shifted again, using his arms to pull himself deeper. Emma felt his chest slide against her tongue, the steady rise and fall of his breaths as he moved. "You're so warm," Galvin said, his voice muffled but full of wonder. "It feels safe." Emma's cheeks flushed. She could feel every part of him, the curve of his back, the faint tremor in his muscles, the softness of his hair brushing the roof of her mouth. She wanted to say something, to tell him how much he meant to her, but her throat tightened with emotion. "Now swallow," he instructed gently, his voice laced with trust. "I'll guide you." Emma hesitated for a moment, then closed her eyes and gulped. The movement was smooth and fluid, his legs sliding past her lips and into her throat. She could feel him descending, his presence filling her completely. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced, strange yet strangely comforting. "You're doing great," Galvin murmured as he shifted inside her. His tone was calm, reassuring, and filled with gratitude. Emma swallowed again, her throat constricting around him as he slid further down. His hands brushed the inside of her cheeks, and she could feel the faint press of his fingers as he steadied himself. Another gulp, and his shoulders disappeared, followed by his head. The final swallow was the most surreal of all, his entire body settling warmly in her stomach. Emma gasped as she felt him inside her, her hands instinctively flying to her belly. It was warm, almost soothing, and she could feel the faintest movements as Galvin adjusted himself. "Thank you, Emma," he said softly, his voice muffled but clear. "You've saved me." She pressed her hands against her stomach, her eyes wide with wonder. I can't believe this," she whispered. "It's real," Galvin replied. "And I'm safe, thanks to you." He shifted slightly, and Emma felt a gentle pressure from within. She couldn't help but smile, her earlier nervousness melting into a strange, almost euphoric calm. The boy she had loved for so long was closer to her than anyone had ever been, and the thought filled her with an overwhelming sense of warmth and purpose. In that moment, she knew she would do anything to protect him. Emma barely had a moment to recover before her TV flickered again. A dark portal opened, and a group of shadowy figures burst through, their eyes scanning the room like predators. Emma froze, her arms instinctively wrapping around her belly. "Where is he?" one of them snarled, their voices cold and unnatural. "I don't know who you're talking about," Emma stammered, her heart racing. The figures exchanged glances before growling in frustration. He has to be here somewhere. Search the house. Emma remained still, trembling as the intruders rifled through her belongings. Minutes later, they stormed out the door, leaving her room in chaos. She exhaled shakily, her hands pressing against her stomach protectively. "They're gone," she whispered. "Thank you, Emma," Galvin said from within, his voice warm and full of relief. "I don't know what I'd do without you." For Galvin, the world inside Emma was a sanctuary like no other. It was warm, soft, and enveloping, a cocoon of safety where the dangers of his world couldn't reach him. The faint, rhythmic sound of her heartbeat echoed all around him, steady and soothing, like a lullaby that seemed to say, "You're safe now." The gentle rise and fall of her breathing created a natural rhythm that made him feel cradled, as if the very walls of his shelter cared for him. He pressed his hands against the inner surface of her stomach, marveling at how it responded with a slight, squishy give. The environment was serene, dimly lit with a faint, warm glow that he couldn't explain but found comforting. The air was humid, carrying her unique scent, a blend of sweetness and something earthy that was undeniably Emma. For the first time in his life, Galvin felt completely protected, cocooned in the embrace of someone who truly cared. "This feels amazing," he murmured, his voice filled with awe. "I've never felt so safe before." From the outside, Emma placed her hands gently over her stomach, smiling at the thought of him nestled within her. It was a strange sensation, but not unpleasant. She could feel his subtle movements, small shifts and presses that sent a faint warmth radiating through her body. The realization that Galvin, her Galvin, was inside her filled her with a sense of intimacy and connection she had never imagined possible. "I'm glad you feel safe," she said softly, her voice tinged with affection. "You can stay as long as you need." Her words made Galvin's heart swell. He leaned against the soft wall, letting its gentle pressure lull him into a deeper sense of security. "Thank you, Emma," he said, his tone sincere. "For everything." As the days passed, the two grew closer in ways neither could have anticipated. They talked for hours, sharing secrets, dreams, and fears. Emma told him about how she had watched him on the show, how she had always wanted to protect him. Galvin listened intently, his voice filled with gratitude every time he spoke. "I always felt so alone," Galvin admitted one night, his voice muffled but tender. "Like no one could understand what I was going through. But you've always cared, haven't you?" Emma's cheeks flushed. She pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling the faint pressure of him resting against her. "I have," she confessed. "I've loved you for so long, Galvin. Watching you, I always wanted to be the one to protect you, to make you feel safe." "You've done more than that," he said, his voice softening. "You've given me something I didn't think I could ever have, someone I can trust completely." The warmth in his words melted her heart. She laughed softly, her fingers tracing lazy circles over her belly. "I'm just glad you're here," she said. "It feels right somehow." One afternoon, as they were talking, Galvin shifted slightly, his movements brushing against the inner wall of her stomach. Emma let out a surprised giggle, her hand flying to her belly. "That tickles," she exclaimed. Galvin grinned inside. "Does it?" he teased, pressing his hand deliberately against the spot he had just brushed. His touch was gentle, playful, and deliberate, and Emma burst into laughter, her body shaking as she tried to squirm away from the sensation. "Stop it," she laughed, her voice breathless and full of joy. "You're so mean." "Mean?" Galvin said with mock offense. "I'm just testing the limits of our connection." He reached out again, this time pressing both hands against the spot that seemed to make her laugh the most. Emma's laughter filled the room, uncontrollable and unrestrained. She clutched her sides, her cheeks burning as tears of mirth sprang to her eyes. "Galvin, I swear she broke off in another fit of giggles, unable to finish her sentence. Inside, Galvin couldn't stop smiling. Hearing her laugh like that, knowing he was the reason for her joy, made his heart swell. It was the first time in so long that he had felt truly happy, and the thought that Emma was laughing because of him made it even more special. "You have the cutest laugh," he said, his tone teasing but affectionate. Emma blushed, her laughter fading into a soft chuckle. "You're impossible," she said, her voice full of fondness. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, a connection that went beyond the physical. Galvin admired Emma's kindness, her unwavering willingness to help him, even when the situation was beyond anything either of them had ever imagined. She had risked everything for him, and that selflessness touched him deeply. For Emma, having Galvin inside her was both surreal and magical. She had always dreamed of protecting him, of being the one he could depend on, and now that dream had come true. His presence filled her with a sense of fulfillment and purpose, and the way he spoke to her, the way he made her laugh and blush, only deepened her feelings. One evening, as they talked, Emma hesitated before saying, "Galvin, can I tell you something?" "Of course," he replied, his voice soft and attentive. "I've always had a crush on you," she admitted, her cheeks burning. "Even before I met you like this. I used to dream about what it would be like to meet you, to be close to you. And now that you're here, it feels perfect." Galvin was silent for a moment, his heart racing. "Emma," he said finally, his voice filled with emotion, "you're incredible. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm so grateful. I've never felt this way about anyone before." Emma smiled, tears welling in her eyes. She placed both hands over her stomach, her voice trembling with happiness. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Galvin." Inside, Galvin pressed a gentle kiss against the inner wall of her stomach, the softest brush of warmth that sent a shiver through her. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," he whispered. Emma laughed softly, her heart feeling fuller than it ever had. "It tickles when you do that," she said, her voice playful yet tender. "But I like it." Galvin smiled, resting his head against the soft walls of his sanctuary. "Good," he said, "because I think I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." And in that moment, neither of them could imagine a world without the other.